And here it is, episode number 3 of the Stick to F1 podcast. Jason Myrtetus, Anthony Mingioni once again, and the triple header. We're heading into the second part, the meat in the triple header sandwich, if you will, and the Styrian Grand Prix live from Austria this weekend. And what's going on? Not a lot of time to rest.
No rest for the wicked, as they say.
Yeah.
Especially the wicked fast.
You know, you sent me something earlier, and it was Mercedes kind of answering their social media questions on Instagram, and the gentleman who was answering all the questions mentioned that when you have a race that you kind of lost on strategy, you had some race pace, and it's good to get right back at it because you can almost paralysis by analysis, especially in F1, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they got some data from from Paul Ricard and the French Grand Prix that they can move going forward and that kind of stuff. And they've been at this track in Austria at the Red Bull Ring several times. I imagine, we thought that Mercedes was going to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at Red Bull last week. I think they did, but Red Bull won it on strategy. But oddly enough, Mercedes had pace, and they had a race pace advantage because Lewis did pull out a 3.2 second advantage before the pit stop. So this is going to be, I think it's going to be incredibly compelling once again.
It's interesting because, again, at the same time, Lewis had indicated some concern about power in this circumstance for Mercedes, not necessarily having enough power, especially when they get into the straights. And I know Lewis Hamilton's indicated concern with regards to going into this weekend. Now, how much of this is gamesmanship on Lewis's part to try to adjust, maybe get Red Bull a little overconfident in what might happen. But again, it's an interesting thing because that track is not necessarily, as much as it is, Red Bull's home track, their package doesn't always necessarily play nicely there. And we saw that happen to Max, obviously, early last season with the initial Grand Prix last year. And it's an again, we all know Spielberg in terms of elevation. We know how much it can really consume power for vehicles. And this is, I think, going to be something really interesting to see. I mean, I think we all know every week is going to be just this whole Mercedes versus Red Bull matter. But now, last week really turned for the first time in a long time. We now have some severe questions about Mercedes, and the strategy was part of it, but they almost sound like there's some other concerns too. But they're going to have to make some major, I think, some adjustments here in a short period of time. But it's true from a competitor standpoint to be able to come right back into it again and use that data potentially going into this race, I think will help. And they've had success here.
Yeah, it's an interesting track because you actually have 3 straights basically with DRS zones on this. It's basically the end of sector 3 all the way through sector 1. And a good portion of Sector 2 is a DRS zone. So it's 3 in a row. So there's a lot of overtaking opportunities. And the interesting about the circuit, too, and to me, is, the turn 1 is an elevation you're going uphill into the turn. And then turn 2 is that really sharp turn. You're kind of rising in elevation. And then turn 3 out of that third DRS zone is you're falling away on a really sharp turn into a technical part of the racetrack. It's such an interesting, simple yet interesting track.
Exactly. In terms of the layout, and you're having to shoot things down fairly quickly from that first turn, almost immediately dropping from, straight away in your 7th to 8th gear, almost flat out, to dropping that sucker almost immediately because of the angle to 2nd gear. And then you get all the way down to that straight, it curves slightly, and then you're hitting the slight elevation, and then you're banging it. And then I think at that point there, that's another 2nd gear. And then the last turn is going to end up being a 3rd gear turn. But you're right, you're kind of falling away. Yep. So you got to hit that thing just right in order to get into that technical part where you start to curve and head around the Red Bull statue on the way to getting to the next part through Sector 3. It is a it is a fascinating track. It plays quick and exactly where you want it to be quick. And it does require a certain skill base. It does require real good racecraft in order to negotiate, because it can get, especially when you get towards the end of it and you're hitting almost those fairly close to 90-degree turns in Sector 3, you got to hit that thing just right. Boom, 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 almost like you're hitting it almost like a hexagon almost in the way you're hitting that turn.
A lot of rhythm to it. And I think the other thing that's interesting too is especially when you look at, one of the big overtaking zones is at the end of that second straightaway into turn 2, and that sharp right that you have to make there, and you got to stay off the curbs. But as we saw, we've seen Leclerc get run out there by Verstappen back in 2018. We saw Lewis Hamilton bump the wheel of Alex Albon there, and Albon says, this guy is such a sore loser because he did it to him again after doing it at Brazil. And, it's an interesting track, and, Verstappen's got 2 wins at the Red Bull Ring. Lewis Hamilton's got 2 wins at the Red Bull Ring, and Verstappen comes into the race holding this advantage in the Drivers' Championship right now, 131 points, 119 for Lewis, 2 races back-to-back on the 2 successive weeks here at the Red Bull Ring. So I think it's a fascinating situation. And as you go into this, I'm trying to figure out who has an advantage going into this at the top of the driver standings. And the only thing I can, after debating it so many times, is I got to go that Verstappen's got the advantage here because of straight line speed, and we'll see what the package is that they run at the Red Bull Ring, and the tires will be different for each of these races.
Yeah.
But the other thing is it just looks to me like Red Bull overall, and all the circuits that we've seen so far, and we've seen a pretty good variety from Spain to now France, and those kind of testing tracks to the road courses and slow corners, and I got to just think that Red Bull at this point has the better car in total than Mercedes does.
Yeah, there's a distinct, and that is what I think Mercedes is trying to account for, much the same way that Red Bull was trying in many ways to deal with Mercedes last year. It's in many ways, it's almost like the situation's been kind of flipped on its ear. The only difference is that Mercedes had some wins at the beginning of the season at Barcelona and a Milan prior to that. So that's one of the reasons why the standings, I think, right now are still close, and why they're close enough that Mercedes is still within touching distance of Red Bull. But again, I would look at it and say, again, it's another critical weekend for Mercedes. If they have some success, something happens where and again, weird things happen sometimes at this track, especially on those turns, where Mercedes could, in circumstances, they might be able to get themselves back in, but they're going to need some things that go outside of the norm of what we've seen so far, certainly within recent weeks, for things to kind of unexpectedly go bad for Red Bull, for me to kind of think that they're going to be in any kind of trouble. I fully expect both. I mean, we say week by week that we expect Lewis and Max to be on the podium. They are head and shoulders above everybody else in the field. The key is the support, and what Valtteri Bottas does and what Sergio Perez does, and that's a big one. That's another major factor that goes into this as well. The one other thing that you mentioned in terms of where we've had issues with some of the curves, and I happened to be watching season 3 of the episode with Danny Ricciardo when he was racing initially in the season against Red Bull, and he and Lance Stroll in the pink Mercedes, Stroll went wide on him and he had to go wide on that turn as well, and it kind of cut him off. So it affects other drive. It can affect even it can affect the midfield just as much.
Oh yeah. And those curbs can damage a floor if you catch them in the wrong way. I mean, you can get a rough ride around there, and it's going to be a big part. There's a sausage curb kind of on the far left of it as well that you got to deal with. And if you're straddling that and you're bouncing on the curbs, you can damage the floor of your car and change the aero very quickly. So, speaking of bouncing, is the front wing flexi wing. This is it's comical because I think that Lewis and Max and Bottas and Perez have really kind of downplayed the rivalry that is these two teams right now with all 4 drivers. But that's not
the principles. Not the
principles. Principals have been lobbing salvos back and forth. Toto Wolff doing it, a couple of weeks ago, saying, "Oh, they didn't capitalize," and Christian Horner is all too happy to engage, and it's kept it very entertaining and loose, and maybe that's the point that they're trying to do, is take the pressure off their drivers and kind of put it squarely on them like a football coach would do.
I absolutely agree with that. I think it's where the two of them are just, and you always hear, Toto likes to say about Christian likes to play his little war games.
Mm-hmm.
And he does. And again, last year was pretty much it was necessary last year for Red Bull just to slow Mercedes down. last year. This year, though, is again a much more sort of, I want to say more of an even fight, but it's not at the moment. The momentum is thoroughly going towards Red Bull, and you add to the mix the fact that Red Bull's rear wing were deemed legal, and now we have the flexible front wing, and of course, of all people, Nico Rosberg getting involved in that conversation right on Sky Sports, and you could see the look on Toto's face, like,
yeah.
But we paid you very well over these years.
Yeah.
Why are we bringing this into a conversation? And I think there was some humor involved, but at the same time, it was there was a little bit of a palpable bit of tension in that post race conversation that definitely. And again, Warner said it in his mind. This is payback for as much as Toto likes to act like he's above the war games. Guess what? You're behind now. He's going to engage in those war games as much as Christian did last year. And Christian's more than happy to do that.
Yeah, it's funny, too, because Mercedes actually put in a claim that some of their pit stop materials or tools for their stops, and we know how good Red Bull is with the quick stops.
Oh, yeah.
They wanted the FIA to investigate some piece of equipment they're using either to lift the car or something for their pit stops, and knowing full well it wasn't going to be deemed illegal, but just to distract, and that's where it's going. It's like, what's next?
It's like baseball right now.
Right? Yeah,
think about this right here.
Foreign substance.
It's like, it's their version. They would look. I think Formula One would look at what's going on in America in Major League Baseball right now, and going, "That's just another week for us."
Yeah.
It's almost continuous, almost all the time in Formula One.
Incredible.
They're always trying to find any angle, any conversation. And, in some cases it's little nitpicky stuff. In some cases it's, like what happened with Racing Point last year with their car, with the pink Mercedes last year. And maybe it's something that's a bit more major, but the political level is, and for anybody who's followed Formula One, this is nothing new, but it seems to be getting even more and more amplified, certainly through social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Watching Jolyon Palmer's analysis on the race at France, this issue that's kind of dogged Mercedes ever since the DAS system was kind of deemed illegal and they couldn't use it anymore to warm up their fronts. You saw the in-lap from Verstappen at lap 18 and the out-lap from Verstappen, and that was the difference why the undercut of 3.2 seconds was taken away. Plus, Lewis got a little bit of wheel spin coming out of the pits. He didn't enter into the box as quickly as Max did or as aggressively, and that is what cost them. And you got to wonder, when you look at it, warming the front tires at a track like Spielberg as well, if you're coming out of a safety car or a virtual safety car, or just on new tires, it could be something that's in play here as well. You're not going to lose as much time at this track,
right?
When you box because the 60 mile an hour, the
limiter.
Speed is so small because of that entrance at France. That's not the case at this track, although it is a weird entrance into the pit here, which is, I would say, almost kind of dangerous the way cars get into the inside there on that turn. It
is, and it could definitely, I think, affect the race itself. I mean, in terms of just as you stated, the ability to spring when to do your undercut, when to do an overcut. Those are all things that have to really, play a role here in doing that. So
one of the things that is Ferrari, they had a horrific weekend. I mean, probably one of the worst weekends of any driver was Leclerc's weekend. They had decent qualifying pace at Paul Ricard. He ends up finishing 16th in the race. His tires evaporated on both stints very quickly. And they got a lot of questions coming out. Well, 2 straight poles on, the road courses and low-speed corners, but what are we going to expect out of Ferrari this weekend and the following weekend at this track in Spielberg?
Again, I think what hurt them as well is certainly the early morning rain did not help. I think it affected everybody, but in this circumstance, seemed to affect them even greater. It was almost 6-7 laps into the race when you already heard. I mean, everybody was complaining, but Charles especially seemed to be, really indicating issues. We all saw he was one of the first. I believe he was the first one in. At lap 14, I believe, he was the first one really to pit for tires in this circumstance, and they still had those issues. And the thing is, and Matteo said it, then Bonotto said it. He's like, this is something that we've known for 2 years. And the fact that we weren't able to adjust to it is something that they have to analyze and take a look at here. Again, with the weather, with the rain coming in, and the rubber that had been on the track kind of melted and kind of faded a little bit. Everybody had issues with initial grip, but they seem to have more than anybody in this case. And again, Ferrari was worried coming into that weekend anyway, and that just kind of, it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy for them. It was that didn't help, but they go in, have a good, and they had themselves in a good spot in qualifying, and then they just lost it on race day. It was semi-surprising, certainly for Charles. I think I wasn't sure how well Carlos was going to do on there, but Charles dropping was alarming to me.
Yeah,
big time.
Yeah, and he just ran his fronts out right away. I mean, I thought that was going to be a rear tire situation in that race, and then you're right, when the rain comes and takes all the rubber off the track overnight, and then way cooler temperatures, it just turned into a front tire, especially a front left situation, and when you lose the fronts, I mean, you just can't get
on those curves, especially Paul Ricard. When you're talking about those long, high-speed turns, it's hell on tires. It is. I mean, everybody complained about it. It was definitely a major part of the race on Sunday. And we're going to need to see again. What I'm keeping my eye on weather right now for Spielberg. At the moment, things seem like they're okay. I think many rain reports I thought were supposed to be like early next week, like maybe Monday or so, but you never know. You are in the mountains, and things can change in a heartbeat. We all saw about how that can, especially on that track, especially if it rains there. Oof, that can be a real. You have to go real cautious, and that really kind of equals the field a bit.
Oh yeah, it's the ultimate, equalizer for lesser cars, and it becomes more about driving. If we get a wet race, where's the advantage at the top? Is it with Lewis or is it with Max? Because while they're both really good in wet conditions, they're very different in wet conditions. Max oftentimes seems to opt for his own line, and it's odd because he finds traction where nobody else is racing. Lewis is a little bit sticking to the line that everybody's on, but he's very good at balancing the power of the car and not, overdoing it, and being really good and just putting in consistent lap after lap in a different.
And I think that's what works there for Lewis. That's one of the reasons why, if it is a rainy condition, I might be more inclined to lean more towards Lewis in that circumstance.
Helps Mercedes because of a pace disadvantage.
Precisely. That's the thing that would equal things up. But if it's a nice dry day, sun is shining, in the Alps, the field, it'll just, it definitely works I think more towards Red Bull.
Yeah. The McLaren, once again, we talked about him post race on Sunday, at a 5-6 with Lando Norris finishing 5th and Danny Ricciardo finishing 6th. His best day in a McLaren car this season. They're 110 points, unquestionably, the best of the rest. It's not even close. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking for Ricciardo to catch a little wind now here and be able to get to. I think big part of it is confidence, figuring the car out, getting the muscle memory, and then confident knowing that you can, put in a good race and kind of build on it this weekend. I think he goes in this weekend feeling really good, and Lando's got to feel great. I mean, he's got 6 top 5s, and he's the only player.
And he's podium, and he's podium there. He's experienced. Well, last season he has a podium, so you would think the weekend shapes up really well for McLaren. And again, at the moment, I don't want to. I would love for McLaren to turn this actually into. I mean, I think we were excited for it to be a legitimate 2-team race.
Yeah, I'd love a 3.
If McLaren can, it's a 68-point gap right now, so that's a lot to cover. But say, let's just say Mercedes, circumstances are what they are. Something happens in the circumstance where maybe one of the cars DNFs. Maybe, the McLaren cars are in the top. Maybe they finish 4 or 5. All of a sudden, that gap really, it's just, we're still at that point of the season where I think most people would kind of poo-poo and say, nah, there's no way. But possibilities there. They're at 110. And their job right now is to kind of keep everybody, after they've put, Ferrari down, Ferrari had that rough weekend, kind of puts them in, so they can kind of keep their eyes ahead of them. And if they can, again, finish, if they're in the points, and if they're in substantial points in this case, say one of them podiums,
Yeah, big jump.
It gets very interesting there. So I'm not at this point sort of looking at McLaren and saying they don't have an opportunity here to at least give you some thought that they could at least give Mercedes some thought, some thought of, hey, we also have to keep an eye behind us as well.
Yeah. It creeping on us. It's amazing because where McLaren was a couple years ago with Alonso, they had two things that weren't good. They had a race car that wasn't particularly good at any track, and they didn't have reliability. Now they've got both, and they've got two good drivers, and now they've got momentum too as a team. Mm-hmm. And Lando's a good young driver. You have a veteran driver that's been on a lot of podiums, won a lot of races, and Danny Ricciardo now getting up to speed. And whether you like Zach Brown or you don't, he's pushed a lot of right buttons and pushed the team so far forward in a really quick manner.
He did, and again,
he really did.
Yeah, and taking into account, of course, the fact their switch over to a Mercedes engine from from Renault. I mean, the last time that they had it, of course, was when they switched over this year. I mean, last year they finished off, that was their last season with Renault. Did solid. This year with a Mercedes engine, the performances, especially from Lando, especially consistent in that Mercedes. He's always up there. And if Danny's able to do it, that's another reason why, again, where the pressure is really, we're still early enough here where if circumstances play a certain way, they can be in, they could be in here to at least make it I don't think they would overtake Mercedes. Again, I think too highly. It's a big ask for me to say that, but it's not outside of the realm of possibility.
The fact that we're even having the conversation is a feather in their cap,
Exactly.
And here's the one thing that I'm pretty certain of: they're the clubhouse leader right now, McLaren, for the best livery of the entire season, and I don't know that it'll be beat. What they ran at Monaco was
absolutely.
Awesome.
I wish they would stick with it. I wish they would have stuck with the Gulf livery. I love the Gulf. And listen, their regular livery is solid. It's a good. I like the color. It's distinct. It looks good. But yeah, that Gulf livery was just, when they had that on the car, I was just like, oh man, guys, consider it.
Yeah.
Even the
so
suits,
awesome.
even the suits look phenomenal.
Yeah.
I thought that it was just like looking at that suit. I'm like, guys, and they were like, nah, it's only just for Monaco. I'm like, you might want to consider it, guys. It's still pretty distinct on that course. That that light blue with the orange was just like,
oh, so sweet looking.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about a couple guys real quick, because there's a couple guys I'm really interested in. I was reading something that Sebastian Vettel was saying. If there was just a few more laps in that race, he ended up finishing in the top 10. Finished 9th in the race, and Lance Stroll finished 10th in the race. But he seems like he is not only reinvigorated and happy again, and it's great to see. They've said at that race team at Aston Martin that the after races, when they're having the kind of the redux and going through everything, it's been a lot longer because Seb's there, and that's because Seb's engaged, which is great to see for that team. And we know that they suffered a little bit with a lot of the changes in their package, but he's a guy right now. He has scored points in the last 3 races, including a second place finish at Baku. Seb is a guy. Could he be in play this weekend with that Mercedes engine at this track for a podium?
It's possible. I'm probably less like, again, I really liked when he's on a street course. Seb is just that he's a machine. He'll get the elbows out, and he just knows what to do there. He could. We know last year certainly that initially that the Racing Points did a pretty good job at Styrian with the Styrian. They could. I'd like to see what Lance does as well. I'm not underrating Lance. I thought Lance really got on his horse last week to go from 19 to 10.
Yep.
So yeah, I do think this is a potential where they could be. Again, I look at them. I'm looking at team order right now. Probably Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, and then probably Aston Martin is probably right there in terms of one of the teams I would look at as being highest in the points, and they need it too right now. It's a good performance but I think they need both of those drivers to kind of push a little bit higher to get more points because they're still a little bit in the mud right now when their season started kind of slowly.
Yeah, and that's where AlphaTauri's kind of dropped off. Sonoda's been very erratic. Gasly has not. Gasly's been good pretty much
Gasly's
all
keeping them
season.
in. I mean,
Yeah,
Sonoda's he's still learning. And that was
yeah,
the risk that, listen, at the end of the day, that's what they took. But again, if you look at what their team was last year, it was Gasly and Kvyat. Danny, you didn't know what you were going to get from week to week. Is
yeah,
he's even going to finish the damn race?
yeah. He's a maniac. I loved watching him race, though. I
Whereas
mean, just
Pierre is just, consistent. So Yuki's learning it. It does. And I know Red Bull likes to say that AlphaTauri is, quote, their sister team. It still is in many ways the junior team.
yeah.
It is, especially when you have a young driver like Yuki.
The other one to keep an eye on, I think, for this weekend, because he's quietly having a very good season, is the Alpine team. And Fernando Alonso has put together a couple points finishes here in a row. Esteban Ocon had a really disappointing race last week. Yeah. I think he's going to bounce back. I think keep an eye on Alpine this week for maybe top 8 finish for at least one of those drivers.
I think so. And it might be Ocon, because Ocon's going to have really, especially after, he had going into the French Grand Prix, he had such a, he's coming on a high. He just signed the multi-year deal with Alpine. He's going to be their face, much like the same way that when Ferrari signed Leclerc to his long-term deal, they sign Ocon to this long-term. They look at him as the face of the team, and I think he wants to have a much better performance than he had in Paris. It was in Paris, was my mind, near Marseille in this case, at the French Grand Prix. So I would say I would actually look to see Ocon. I mean, the racecraft of Alonso, you always have to take into account, but I'm going to account for the fact that I think Ocon's going to be very motivated to make up for that performance in France.
Very interesting. All right, that's basically going to bring it to a close, but we got to do our pick a podium.
Oh yeah.
We have to. One other thing we got to do first.
Yes, we do.
Before we pick the podium, we can do F101 because we got some messages from people on social media that a lot of people listening to this may be a little bit newer to Formula One, so we wanted to add some F101 kind of try and educate people a little bit on a lot of the elements of it. And what a perfect time to do it, by the way. Coming off of, Baku, where we had 2 tire failures, and then that French Grand Prix, which played out with a lot of tire strategy because people pitted way earlier. Bottas had the vibration that he was dealing with because of a flat spot. So F101 this week is on tire management. And we can't even emphasize enough how much of an element this is to success. I mean, really, it's why Red Bull finished with two racers on the podium, because Sergio's a master of tire management and preserving his tires. And, tires oftentimes at a lot of these, Grand Prix determine who's having success and who's not.
Exactly. And again, if you're not familiar with obviously the tires, obviously the company that produces the F1 tires is Pirelli. They have a variety of compounds that they use, the hard, mediums, and the softs, all depending on which track it is that, how it will play and how you would, wanted to start the race. And then invariably you're going to be
C5, right?
C1 through C5. Yeah, those are the main tires in this circumstance, with obviously the mid ranges being there for the, and they're all color coded as well. Softs usually being red. The mediums, and again, each of them are generally color coded in this case. And if you ever watch a Grand Prix, they actually show you the different compounds at the beginning of the race. And then if they switch to intermediates or the wets, those are usually designated as blue and green.
Yeah.
So, and we haven't really had a chance to really see much of the blues and greens yet this season. We haven't had a lot of rain. We haven't had a ton of rain just yet, but if you see them, there's always that possibility.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the big thing too. You'll see it in wet races. We will get one eventually. I thought maybe we were going to have one at Paul Ricard, but you'll see guys trying to keep those green intermediate tires on as long as they can, because you don't want to pit twice to go to slicks, and you don't want to go to slicks too early.
No, you definitely don't, because you're losing time. That's it. That's everything's about speed. And once you've got heavy tread, then at that point it gets you're just literally driving to survive the race and not wipe your car out in this circumstance. And we've watched enough wet races. Sometimes it's fun, and sometimes, especially last year at Hungary, oh boy.
Yeah,
that was not the most exciting race ever. And on that kind of track, when it's as technical as the Hungaroring is, it just turns into a slog.
Yeah, and the other part of it too is the overcut and the undercut, and you saw it firsthand for anybody that watched, the race last weekend in France. The undercut that Max pulled on what was first Bottas trying to pull it on Max, and that was because of the vibration, and that vibration gets to such a point where, it makes the car detrimental in all areas and safety wise. There's such a vibration. Like we think of a vibration as like your phone vibrating.
Right.
This is like teeth chattering. You can't even understand what the driver's saying on the radio. It's crazy vibration. So, and then the undercut, if you get in and you get on those fresh tires and you can manage to undercut the driver who is in front of you because you go to the better tires a lap earlier. Now that tire, in theory, should have the advantage at the end of the race because they're on a tire that's one lap less worn, but that's often not the case at the end of the race because of the weight load of burning off fuel. And fuel directly, the weight of the car does affect the wear of the tire. You start with 110 kilograms of fuel. They all start with the same amount. And there's more wear on a pair of softs at the beginning of a race with a heavier, heavier.
You're pressing it down again. You just got more weight and you're pressing that. I mean, you have great grip at the beginning of it, but invariably as you continue to, with all the physics that are involved in racing and the speed they're going, and also depending on what type of downforce package that you have, how much you're trying to cling to that track as much as possible versus top speed. That's something that we may have seen. You and I speculated on last week with Ferrari adding potentially to the mix of their issue in terms of, maybe they were anticipating that they needed to be more on a higher downforce. That's also pressing your tires even further in during a long race. So again, these are the considerations with undercuts and overcuts as to what's the proper timing, when to go in, and get to that. And then again, remembering the earlier you are, and you're more likely to be on what they call a one-stop versus two-stop strategy. That was another question that we had in the race as well. Was it time to come back in? When to do it if you're trying to challenge for that extra point for the fastest lap of the race? These are all things that have to be sort of calculated and considered when you are deciding when to go in and what tires to use.
Yeah, and like when Max goes in for a second stop and goes on to the mediums, there's too many laps because the mediums didn't last that long in the first stint. Well, that's true, they didn't. But the difference is he's managing them, knowing exactly how far he's got to get. So he's meeting an expected lap time, lap in and lap out. The track is rubbering in, so you're getting more grip, so you're not sliding as much, which obviously, lends to degrading your tires even further, and the lighter fuel load. So it's like a combination of all those things.
It's just abrasive. You're just getting it's just continuing to wear and wear and wear and wear, which is why again we saw Valtteri Bottas again having such struggles trying to maintain third in this circumstance, and why he was pretty furious that they didn't go to a two-stop, because at that point, as well as Lewis might have been able to manage it, even he said it himself how much of a struggle it was at the end, that it became to a point where beyond pace, he just wasn't able to hold off. He wasn't able to hold off Max because Max had successfully been able to get to that second set of tires and just had better opportunities to get past them.
Yeah, you just can't get on the gas pedal when you're constantly sliding your fronts trying to get out of turns. You just can't. You're just going to destroy them even further. All right, Ant, let's go to pick the podium. You want to go first?
No, I'm going to let you go first today.
All right. My podium for this race, the first of two at the Red Bull Ring in Spielberg, Austria. I'm an idiot. Throw another shrimp on the bobby. I got Max Verstappen winning this race. He's not going to win both of them there, but he's going to win the first one. Hamilton's going to come in second, and then my third, to fill out the podium, is going to be Lando Norris.
I was tempted. I had been tempted to go Norris, but to me it was almost like a little too on the nose because of last season. That being said, is he trending in that direction? I would say yes. I think he's trending well towards that direction, but I'm going to say I might be more inclined next week to potentially lean towards Norris. I want to see his performance and how close he gets to that spot. For me, I'm going to agree with you in this circumstance. I'm going to say it's going to be Verstappen. I think it's going to be Verstappen and Hamilton. But I'm going to say in a little bit of a surprise, I'm going to take, and he's been on a good roll, I'm going to take his teammate. I'm going to take Danny Ricciardo to get his first podium this season. Last race, you took Ricciardo. This time, I'm going to take him.
All right, so you got Max, Lewis, Ricciardo.
Mm-hmm.
and I have Max, Lewis, and Lando. So we're kind of, I mean, the constructors aren't going to change based on our picks. You know what's going to happen? There's going to be an incident, and all three are going to get all those teams are going to be taken out of the race for some. The last thing too, the people say, well, there's going to be two races at the same track. Isn't that going to be kind of repetitive? The differences will be. They did this last year. It will be stark. The tires will be different for each race, so the range of soft, mediums, and hards will be far different. And the weather will invariably be different, whether you have cooler or warmer track temperature. It will be two distinctly different races, even though they're only within a week of each other at the same track, and no configuration changes.
And remember where are you? You're in the mountains. Yep. You're in the Austrian. Weather is changeable at just about any time. And when you're in mountain conditions, even more of a chance for extreme changes of either heat or heating or cooling of the track.
Absolutely.
So do not expect this to be the same race in both races. Definitely.
And they'll both be compelling, especially with this year. I texted this the other day. They could race in a sewer, and it would be compelling at this point. When you make the Paul Ricard track that compelling, I'm convinced you can race anywhere, including the King of Prussia Bowl. All right, that's going to put a wrap on this episode of the Stick to F1 podcast, episode 3. We'll bring you a post-race from the Red Bull Ring coming up on Sunday. So everybody, in the meantime, enjoy your F1 practice, free practice coming up on Friday and Saturday, and qualifying and the race on Sunday. And we'll talk to you on the next Stick to F1 podcast.